You are suddenly teleported to a TED Talk stage in front of thousands of people. What do? I'd tell them I'm Ted. Australians are British Texans. I'm talking about sharks. I've watched enough Shark Week to be prepared for this moment. I start tap dancing out of the TED Talk. Hey guys, today I want to talk to you about first impressions and how to make a good entrance. Have a panic attack and cry due to stage fright and anxiety. The Ashley Simpson jig. Welcome to my TED Talk about how to f up your life when given many chances to not f it up. I pull a Snickers bar out of my pocket and slowly eat it while the crowd sits in silence. After I'm done, I look up, startled, and say, uh-oh, I didn't bring enough for everyone. Freeze up, then run off stage and feel super embarrassed. Find a place to hide, stay there and relieve the world of my face. It doesn't need this embarrassment. Start talking. Listen here, you little piece of. Knock all the sets and stage decor over. Make it look like an accident and say that I didn't do it. Every 60 seconds in Africa, a minute passes. We can stop this together. Improvise Sam Hyde's TED Talk. I would tell them the intricacies of gambling, how odds work, and a history of horse racing and a few handicapping tips including what it really means. He didn't kill himself. Start striping and hope for the best. Explain hentai in the most complicated way possible without saying sex, anime, or porn. Walk off the stage because I have no obligation to speak. So is the teleportation like instant transmission from Dragon Ball Z, or are we talking the light show a la Terminator? Give a short lecture on the genius of the Senior 71's engine design and how it made 60% of its thrust before the air even hit the first stage of the engine's compressor. In a nutshell, the inlet cone could move in and out, and it directed the dense shockwave of air that it created into the 1-inch wide engine air intakes. Immediately following the 1-inch gap there was a rapid opening into a pretty sizable cavern before the engine. This had two effects that were important. It slowed the air down to below supersonic speeds, which was needed for the engine to basically function at all. Jet engines don't handle supersonic shockwaves well, and it created a massive increase in pressure on the walls of the cavern. This would normally just cause an increase in pressure on all sides of the cavern, but there is an engine on one side, so the pressure pushes on the forward parts of the cavern with great disproportion to the pressure on the other side. Because the jet engine is removing it, this effect created significant amounts of thrust, tens of thousands of pounds of thrust, before the air even hit the engine. It's probably my favorite fact about jet engines. I was an aircraft mechanic in the Navy for 10 years. Masturbate. And the crowd just silently sits there, watching you do it for the entire 10 seconds it takes. You hear your soft whimpers echo off the back walls of the theater as you shoot it onto an old man in the front row. A single person claps. Your comment made me cringe into another dimension. This isn't where I parked my car. Shit on the floor. The government is lying to you and society will collapse in your lifetime. Talk about Feynman and the right way to do scientific experiments. Basically regurgitate his speech to the Caltech graduating class of 1974. It is something that should be mandatory reading for everyone in the world. Titus Andronicus in mime. Oh Jesus. He's raping himself and cutting his own tongue out. And there go the hands. Laugh the entire time. Tell them to ask me a question and then joke and riff with them, asking the other smart audience members to answer the questions that they have knowledge in. Basically be a host to guide a conversation between them. I'd talk about modern horology and the internet for about 10 minutes before I veered off in a random direction, finally finishing with an anecdote about my friend crashing his car into his work van, which contained his brand new motorcycle. I say hi, I'm a random black guy from Florida. I say a bot told me I have the 57th highest Reddit karma. Let me tell you about Reddit and how social media sucks. Ask if anyone knows the whereabouts of William Bill S. Preston ESQ, and Ted Theodore Logan. Water is being poisoned by the government because 100% of people who drink water die. Any questions? So let me tell you why most companies run their supply chains wrong. Teach. I've cumulatively done thousands of lessons, so I'll summarize, analyze some badass medieval romance in a funny way and draw a connection audiences can understand. ... You might be wondering how I just did that. Let me tell you a story about how I came across the wonders of essential oils. Multi-level marketing was right all along. Will the real Slim Shady please stand up? Currently naked, so probably cover myself up and run backstage. I'd stand there and helicopter until someone yanked me off the stage. Probably talk about education. Apparently they are into that. Would most likely discuss how we are undeserving our populations of students that want to get into fields in the trades. How the market is in need and we need to allow for opportunities for kids to choose if in high school they would like to go into a college prep route or if they would like to choose a skilled trade to start training in. This would, in my opinion, make schools more serving to the students and would increase academic results as well because kids would choose to do things they have interest in. Say sorry that took so long. I accidentally took a left turn at Albuquerque. Say have you met Ted? And point towards the big TED writing behind me. I have a feeling OP asked this because they needed ideas. Yep, I am planning to make TED Talk on the spot and I need ideas. Honestly, I'd talk about mental health, something I'm really passionate about. I'd share some poems I wrote that help explain what it's like to be mentally ill. As a writer, I spend a long time thinking about writing and zero time actually writing, so I could actually bullshit my way through talking about my favorite writing techniques and advice that I'd invented. I'm just going to start talking about linguistics or music. Say check 1 2, give the guy in the booth the thumbs up, and walk off stage. I could easily put together a lecture about Reddit in a snap. A quick introduction as to what it is and how it works, then a brief history it and the many scandals, both meta and when they've made the news. Then I would just spend the rest of the time introducing them to some great subreddits and show how there is basically a community for everything. Question whether or not these people were gathered to see me for some reason or whether I've just gatecrashed somebody else's TED Talk. So how about that airplane food, huh? TED Small Talk. Start with, any questions? I know the 3 years I spent doing improv weren't a waste. Make ridiculous shit up. So, in 2008 I learned something very valuable about myself. I hate hot days. Not a ton, but just a little. So I asked myself, what if a day was never hot again? I founded a startup and well, since then, my progress has been, well, I've been so incredibly blessed. Well, what's the technology behind it? That's the great part. I employ a bunch of elves with pilot's licenses, load their little planes up with magical pixie ice, and keep going until I'm dragged off stage. Meow. I bet you're wondering how the I just did that, aren't you? Well, so am I. Anyway, here's Wonderwall. Hi. Didn't expect to find myself up here tonight. Hey, so, thanks a lot. See ya. I'd introduce myself and speak about the importance of therapy and psychiatric care for abused and neglected children who enter the system. Giving my own past as an example, I'd talk about how having PTSD for so long 30 years before I was diagnosed deeply affected the way my brain works and how mandated therapy and psychiatric care if necessary should be the standard of care for kids like I was. I'd go on to talk about how assuming children bounce back and don't need help is not only detrimental to the current well-being but it has a profound impact on their future. I'd go into great detail about how the kids who seem to need help the least, the quiet quiet ones are often those who need it the most. I'd explain how the lack of therapy and psychiatric care my own father experienced when he was in the system led him down a path of self-destruction from which he has yet to recover. He's in his 60s. I'd discuss my sister and her 6 kids and how, like me, her children were second-generation foster kids. I'd talk about how even if the cycle of abuse didn't continue, that it didn't necessarily mean that we're magically healthy adults capable of raising our own children. We'd discuss the programs I want to start for children who age out of the system, and how even if they have a place to go, they don't necessarily possess the skills to continue to maintain a stable life for themselves. If children are the framework upon which we build our world's future, then the least we can do is care for them properly when their parents can't or won't do so. Talk about last night's breakdown. This is my TED Talk about Severus Snape and Albus Dumbledore and why they are not heroes to be respected. I'll then go over the allotted time. Walk off stage while saying, "Thank you for attending my TED Talk about the easiness of modern teleportation." Turn around, see what the presentation's title was, and continue it. I'm Michelle Obama and this is my message. I'd talk about finding everything intrinsically interesting. Make something sound really smart, but it's stupid. Here's the thing, a hot dog isn't a sandwich, it's actually a taco. A Pop-Tart is a ravioli. Thank you. Cue standing ovation. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? I thought not. Start talking about how I overcame my anxiety. Ask you like jazz, then walk off. The robot. I'm a full-time freelance musician. Honestly, I'd probably talk about the way learning music is a lot like learning language and how we tend to fail at teaching music because of the ways too many people attempt to learn, which is a rather rote way with small number of very difficult pieces of music, rather than the way we learn language by just reading an ultra-high volume of very easy, level-appropriate stuff so that we have a functional use of language. This leads us to be able to have conversations, read things, understand dialects, and speak extemporaneously on topics. Unfortunately, the state of musical academia often leads us to not be able to do the same things in a musical context. It's often taught equivalently to having someone try to learn a foreign language by memorizing a very difficult poem and reciting, then learning another one and reciting it, literally just memorizing a series of phonemes without even understanding the basic grammar and vocabulary of that language. I'd probably also branch into how music is relatively unique as a subject in that we teach it at college as if virtually nothing has happened in 250 years, basically anything past middle period Beethoven. Imagine if we taught any other subject with the language and understanding of how that subject existed 250 years ago. Once again, particularly if we literally taught language as it was spoken 250 years ago. This leaves many classically trained musicians literally not having the same vocabulary as working musicians. The limitations of common practice period theory analysis tools really make it nearly impossible to use them to describe and understand things that are extremely common in contemporary music. Combining the saturation of supply of these under-informed musicians with the dwindling demand for that extremely narrow spectrum of music creates a real problem in terms of musicians finding work, but hey, it works out great for me because there's far less competent competition. People are very narrowly trained in a field that rewards demands honestly being very broadly skilled even if you aren't absolutely perfect. Ultimately, so much of this is driven by a tribalism inside of music culture. Largely classical versus contemporary, very broad categories there, but also going deeper into subcultures within those. Like even in the classical space, the divide between pianists, winds, strings, and vocalists is pretty intense, and they all have their own very extreme weaknesses that just aren't addressed enough by musical academia. This is further exacerbated by the fact that most professors were trained in this way, but found that there was no work in the classical space. So they become professors at a university and give performance degrees with no real-world performance experience. As in trying to actually make a living playing their instrument, not playing in institutionally provided venues with a very insular atmosphere. So you have a blind leading the blind situation. And just due to human psychology, this leads to deeper tribalism as these professors often denigrate what they don't understand. If they don't understand contemporary music language, they just write it off as being silly and unimportant rather than addressing their own ignorance in effort to be better teachers. But the current academia institution doesn't really reward that, and it may actually go the other way. So mostly it's stuck in the status quo. And walk off the stage. Turn around, bend over, and start talking out my ass like Ace Ventura. Get on my soapbox about how people need to be kinder to one another, that there is no excuse to assholery. I'll give the best damn TED talk ever, say it and repeat it until my subconscious believes it. Floss my way off stage while smiling maniacally. Thank you for coming to my TED talk on teleportation. There will be no further demonstrations.